Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. You know, our show's been on for 25 years, and tonight we're going to look back at 7 different physicians who've appeared on our shows over the years. It's no means all the different physicians who have, but some of the more important ones. So first of all is the Dean of Oregon Health Sciences University, John Benson. The 1999 interview with Dr. John Benson. He was the chair of the National Science Foundation's Institute of Medicine's 1999 study, Marijuana as Medicine. And so I and Dr. Philip Leveque interview Dr. John Benson. Dr. Leveque was a doctor of osteopathy who pioneered medical marijuana here in Oregon. This interview is from 1999. Then next we have a show from 1997 with Dr. Fred Oerther, another pioneer in legalization here in Oregon. We have 2 clips with Dr. Todd Mikuriya, who helped pass the first medical marijuana law that was instituted in the United States down in California in 1996, Prop 215. We have Dr. Todd Mikuriya on the stage here in Portland at Hemp in 2006, and another clip with him in 2009 where Dr. Mikuriya appears with Dr. Rick Baer, who was the chief petitioner on Oregon's medical marijuana initiative that passed back in 1998, ballot measure 67. And also a nurse, Ed Glick, appears on that same clip from 2009. And then we have a couple of clips from 2006 with Dr. Thomas Orvald talking about cannabis for pain and cannabis for gastrointestinal ailments. So stay tuned for that. In fact, if you are a loved one or looking for a doctor to help you get a medical marijuana permit, we have a referral service. We can refer you to doctors all over the United States. Just call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. So I hope you enjoy this special doctor visit with some of the most prominent doctors in the history of medical marijuana. Stay tuned and help us restore hemp. Good night.
I feel the force.
The Israeli scientist, I think his name's Raphael
McCollum.
He's the one who discovered THC about 25 years ago and then discovered the receptor sites, or at least worked on the team of...
Worked on those and has also been involved in some of the endogenous cannabinoids, the natural substances we all have in our brains and bodies as well. Still very active.
Right.
Excuse me, are those comparable to endorphins or
Well, they're a different group of chemicals, also endogenous though, that use different receptors. There are different receptors for the opioids, morphine and codeine, those 2 substances. So the endorphins are among these agents that help energize the neurons to put out transmitters in various centers of the brain. And cannabinoids, or the components of the marijuana leaf, are yet another system, pharmacological system.
So that endogenous system, I think they call it the endorphin-like substance. It's anandamides, is that the problem?
Anandamide is the one that is best developed. It also uses the so-called CB1 receptor, cannabinoid 1 receptor, and such as THC does, And then there's another one that's 2-AG, arachidonyl-glycerol, which is another of these endogenous cannabinoid-like substances.
Have they identified the primary action of this receptor system? Is it?
There are many actions, actually. The receptors have been identified and cloned, actually, and they can be sited or located in various parts of the brain that have to do with pain perception, with movement control, with control of vomiting, with warm and pleasant feelings, with sedation, and so forth. So they're very common throughout the brain.
So that there is a definite, what shall we say, therapeutic action of these substances. Would that be?
Well,
I mean,
I wouldn't say
the actions that you mentioned seem to me to be therapeutic in nature, or could be therapeutic.
Well, they might be exploited for therapeutic uses, that's correct, because there are these systems
Yes.
in place. And that's the reason, I'm sure, that people have found some utility for the use of these cannabinoid substances.
Before the president of the Institute of Medicine asked you to be a co-investigator, can you tell us about the process that led up to the Institute of Medicine conducting this inquiry?
Yes, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is directed by Barry McCaffrey, asked the Institute to consider such a study and was willing to fund it. About the same time, a major foundation also thought this would be worthy of study, but the Institute thought it better, and so did apparently General McCaffrey, if only the one sponsor were responsible. And so a proposal was made to his office by the Institute staff, which led to a statement of task, so-called, and then the funding of the study.
What was the mandate from the Office of National Drug Control Policy on didn't they exclude, they just wanted the medical report, nothing to do with science or social policy?
The science, yes. They wanted the scientific basis for any benefits or harms that might come from the medical use of marijuana or its component substances. And we were not restricted, but we were not picked either to address issues of social, legislative, regulatory, etc. kinds of considerations. I think it would have been a very different statement of task and a very different group. It would not have included me.
Were you involved at all? I know that the Institute of Medicine produced a report 15 years before regarding marijuana, not specifically as medicine.
There
you must
was
have reviewed that.
Oh, absolutely. And I was not. That was in 1982. And it was frustrated by the lack of clear science, rigorous experimentation, and called repeatedly for research in various fields. In the meantime, there's been a explosion of knowledge in the basic science field. All of these anandamide and receptors and neurotransmitters and siting of these things in various control areas in the brain have been elaborated. So we were at a distinct advantage over the people who did that study. And we hope we carried things a bit further because of that new science.
Could you address that explosion in science and discovery of the receptor system a bit for our audience?
Well, it really was the identification of the receptors themselves, cloning them, siting them wherever they were found, both in the brain and peripherally, The CB2, the cannabinoid 2 receptor, is primarily in the immune system and more peripheral nervous system, and CB1 is primarily in the brain. These endogenous cannabinoid-like substances that I've mentioned were elaborated, and a good deal of just straight pharmacology done on them, so that we had the advantage of, for example, showing the effects in animals on pain, and showing the effects on control of motion, things of that nature, from these basic science advances. They were really quite remarkable and pretty exciting to an internist clinician like myself. Had no idea they had existed.
Here we have Dr. Fred Oerther.
Hi, Paul.
In as a guest and a longtime activist for freedom here in the state. I'm Paul Stanford. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, and this show was brought to you by our Political Action Committee, the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation of Hemp. It's an all-volunteer effort, and it exists solely to put the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act on a ballot, which exists solely to get back some of our freedoms, which allow us to enjoy cannabis recreationally, hand it out as medicine through pharmacies, and allow our farmers to grow industrial hemp.
Yeah, the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act would allow the state to make some money just the way they make money off beer, liquor, and tobacco in terms of taxing it through the state liquor store system, like they do with distilled alcohol. The state would license farmers to cultivate the drug for sales to the state commission. Then the state commission would distribute it at cost to pharmacies and to the liquor stores where they'd make a profit. It would also allow farmers to cultivate industrial hemp. And hemp, as many of our viewers know, produces more fiber for clothing and textiles and paper, and more oil for fuel and food, and more protein than any other plant on this planet. So our job here is to stop the war on drugs, and we're trying to do that through using our most powerful tool, the pen, through the initiative process, and we need your help. So we urge you to give us a call at our number, which is right there on your screen. It's 235-4607 in the Portland area. And if you're outside of the Portland area, just dial 503-235-4606. We'll send you our newspaper and our petitions because we want to get you involved. There's a bunch of different ways to get involved outside of petitioning too, including transporting people to events, data entry, delivering newspapers. But most of all, we want to get you involved, right, Paul?
Yeah, and it's very simple to gather signatures. Just the other day, Paul and I went out with a new person, and within half an hour, he had picked it up and was raring to go the next day out by himself. And it's fun. You're actually out there. You're meeting people. It's a good place to people watch, and it's amazing to find out how many people don't care about their own personal lives out there. You ask them if they're, if you want to look at sign initiative, they don't even say no. They don't even ask what the initiative is. They don't care about their own political rights anymore. They're just like too involved in themselves to do anything about it. Because they're just, it's that, our society has taught us to, go inward and not think about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Voting is just one way of democracy. Democracy is really power in the people and not two wolves and a sheep voting on the menu, which is what it's become, right?
Yep.
They call it majoritarianism. But politics and voting, you vote a lot of ways. You vote with dollars, you vote with your feet, you vote with ballots, and if it comes to it, sometimes in some jurisdictions they've voted with bullets. They did here a couple of hundred years ago, 1776, but the initiative process is a way to peacefully participate in the political process, and under the theories that we call our own, we're supposed to be able to change the rules under which we live, and that's.
Well, You know, I'd like to tell people that petitioning is one of the most effective and effectiveness-oriented activities that you can take. I know on a previous show I've given this analogy that I think if you don't exercise your political rights, you lose your political rights. And just like your any other type of exercise, if you don't do it, you're going to lose that power. And if you look at voting, voting is a very important activity, and I wouldn't want to say to denigrate it at all, but I think voting is like lifting a 2-pound weight. And if you're going to write to your congressman or write to your local newspaper, that's like exercising and lifting a 5-pound weight. If you're going to get a petition, though, and circulate it among your family and friends, well, now you're exercising with a 10-pound weight. But the most effective thing you can do is to go out in public and meet people you don't know. And if you do it with a group of us, it's fun. And you have people tell you how grateful they are that you're there doing that. And that, to me, is like lifting a 100-pound weight in comparison to the different ways we can exercise our political rights.
I like that. I like that metaphor. When I started petitioning, I wasn't very good. I knew what I knew, but I couldn't express what I knew. And by the time I had talked to 1,000 people and explained what I was about, I refined my explanation down to a very few, very succinct, cogent, correct words. And after I'd listened to 1,000 stories, I knew what it was, and I was able to respond to people's concerns. What are their common questions around this issue? And to me, it was invaluable political training. For me, it was better than going down to hang out in Salem doing that kind of apprenticeship. I know that you did an apprenticeship sort of this summer. You were in legislative
assistant. I
assistant.
tried to go in there and stop this darn recrim bill, and I guess I didn't do enough, or the fates were lined up against us.
It's all process. You know, you can't be goal-oriented. You can't stop Leviathan. You can't stop the locomotive.
No.
You were down there honing your skills. You were down there putting a little pressure on. It all counts. That's what politics is about.
Yeah.
I wanted to have you talk a little bit about something in your intro you talked about. What happened when they ended alcohol prohibition? Remember, we had like 13 or 14 years, 29 to 33, to end alcohol prohibition. And what did they do at the end of prohibition? What they did was they set up what I call non-criminal distribution, basically. And you've addressed that in the thing about the liquor stores, and I wish you'd tell me a little bit more about how that's going to work. Because there has to be non-criminal distribution.
Exactly.
There's going to have to be that mechanism somehow. It's going to have to be set up and worked, and it's going to have to be made fair, and all of those things.
Okay, well, what would happen is this. A farmer who was interested in cultivating the drug for sale would get a license from what is currently the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. However, the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, our initiative petition, changes the name of the OLCC to the OICC, the Oregon Intoxicant Control Commission, using the term intoxicant to represent what both liquor and marijuana do to people. And so we decided to eschew the term drugs because that might include pharmaceuticals. Well, anyway, a farmer who was interested in that would apply for a license. The state would determine how much it needs to purchase in a given period. Then the state would equitably distribute the license among the applicants, and they would buy either the maximum amount the farmer would grow, or they would buy approximately the same amount from the different farmers. Now, according to specifically the Single Convention Treaty, the state has to have a commission, and the Single Convention Treaty is an international treaty that governs the way controlled substances can be sold by the signatories, and it has over 100 different nations that have signed up to it. It's not a good treaty by any means, and personally I'd like to see it repealed. But it's a structure that we first have to work in, and the way to repeal it is to go to the United States Senate and have them repeal it. Well, it's a real hard job to go to your 100 U.S. senators and get them to do something like that. So here we tried to write our initiative in compliance with that treaty so that it be upheld. According to that treaty, the state has to collect the entire crop within 4 months of harvest. So the cannabis would be harvested by the farmers, and then it might be processed into cigarettes or any one of a number of things. And so processors would have it, but within 4 months of harvest, the state would take control of that and then distribute it to pharmacies for medical need, and it would be at cost for pharmacies. It wouldn't be taxed, and it would sell it through the 270 store liquor store system that we have here in the state of Oregon. Here in Oregon, we're one of the 26 states that has a state-controlled store system for distilled alcohol products. And rather than creating a new infrastructure to comply with these international treaties, we decided to work within the existing structure. So the state would take control of it and put it in the state liquor stores. However, our initiative allows individuals to cultivate their own marijuana without a license. And it also makes it illegal to prohibit any specific strain of seed or cuttings. So if you want to go to your local garden store and pick out the variety you want or the seed that you want, the trade in seeds and starts is not regulated. But the trade in the drug is. Basically, it's like wine and beer. If you want to brew your own beer or make your own wine, you don't need a license to be able to do that. But if you want to brew enough beer or make enough wine to sell, and you want to sell it, then you've got to get a license, and the government's going to come in and make certain you're applying the laws that the legislature's enacted. Does that explain it? Is there anything that's missing here?
Yeah, we have, again, in short, a non-criminal distribution system. It's set up. We have the skeleton or the outline or it's already there. Mm-hmm. Does the single convention deal with alcohol as a substance? No. So that's out of the...
Exactly,
okay.
The purview of the single convention.
Okay.
It's not a scheduled drug. So
and tobacco also is not a scheduled drug.
No, not at all. It's not even considered a drug yet, even though the settlement with the tobacco companies...
Well, no, in the U.S. now that the FDA has the authority to regulate tobacco as a drug.
It is a drug.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should see some interesting things. If it was health and safety, as somebody pointed out not too long ago, they would be confiscating the homes and cars and money of people who use alcohol and tobacco, or who buy and sell alcohol and tobacco, and that's the prohibition approach. And they have chosen not to do it at all as far as tobacco is concerned until recently.
And that's 400,000 deaths a year, according to mortuary statistics.
Yeah, 400 and far more than alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, you get 100,000 deaths a year. But for marijuana, zilch,
and all,
zero, folks.
Even if you believe their numbers, all
that's their numbers.
Illegal drugs put together is less, 5,000, something like that?
Yeah, because very few people, actually die from illegal drugs. They die from, poor nutrition because they're doing illegal drugs.
Pharmaceutical drugs, though, are like 20 to 50,000.
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, though, pharmaceutical drugs. People have poor nutrition and they're doing pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah.
But it's from all the side effects, that the impurities that they mix with these drugs.
Yeah.
Like even these days with cannabis, you never know what's sprayed on cannabis. I mean, that's, for anybody who's a consumer out there, that's the scary part. You don't know what somebody's sprayed on.
So in light of that, I'd like to point out that the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act takes that into consideration. The cannabis that is sold has to be graded and tested for adulterants. And the packages have to say what adulterants, what additives are included in that cannabis. If you look at tobacco, we all know they put saltpeter in there to make them burn. They actually put a little bit of ammonia in there to release the nicotine and make it pass through the blood air membranes in your lungs. They put in, I've heard upwards to, I don't know, what is it, 400 different chemicals in a tobacco cigarette, but you'll never find that written on any pack of tobacco cigarettes. What they do is they chop it up and they put it into a sludge and they add a bunch of stuff to it and then they dry it out. Well, according to the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, if they wanted to do something like that with cannabis, they'd have to list every single additive, and they would have to warn of the health danger of any that have harmful effects, known harmful effects to human health.
They brought it on themselves, you know. When I was a kid, 50 years ago, we all called cigarettes were called coffin nails. Everybody knew that one cigarette took a day off your life. That was, or an hour. You know, there was everybody knew that. That was common knowledge. It was vernacular proof. And, you know, they've gotten away with that for years. They run that scam, well, science hasn't proven. Well, yes, nobody asks science. They ask shills, and Shill said, oh, no, there's nothing. But, you know, they have not treated tobacco very well. The thing I find historically interesting about alcohol prohibition is we had prohibition from 29 to 33. And historically, to me, it looks like for the next 50 years after alcohol prohibition was repealed, that the public attitude was so bad about anybody that talked about alcohol that we couldn't publicly recognize that hundreds of thousands of people were dying or being injured in drunk driving accidents every year. That people were dying of cirrhosis. The people that brought these problems up were ignored because of that 13 years of moral grandeur that they called alcohol prohibition, with gangs, with increasing federal encroachment into the lives of private citizens and also into local politics. The feds got big into local law enforcement and politics in prohibition. And it took 50 years before society as a whole and our rulers as a group could begin to address the problem of alcohol consumption.
Well, wasn't just that. I think because if you look back when they repealed prohibition, it was a two-part thing. As usual, the government always gets the second part. Part number one, repeal prohibition. Part number two, there was to be a massive education campaign to the American public about the dangers of abuse of alcohol, which is to be funded by the alcohol companies.
Right.
But that was the agreement. But the next day they axed Part B.
Right.
That happens all the time.
Now,
but I mean that's where the real problem was, and that's why the abuse to this day reigns with alcohol, and which is why among our children that's the highest drug they abuse is alcohol.
Right.
But with the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, it's a different story.
Yeah, we wrote the Tax Act to specifically distribute the profits and the taxes that will be the state's windfall when they tax and regulate the cannabis market. Right now, marijuana is the number one cash crop here in the United States, and in Oregon, it's the number one cash crop by probably the largest factor in the United States, with the possible exception of Hawaii. Here in Oregon, we have one of the highest per capita production rates of cannabis. What our initiative will do is it would bring in that money out of the black market and put it on the table for all of us to see, and the state would have a share in that. In 1989, the DEA said that was $2.6 billion. That's the price of marijuana is about doubled since 1989. So it might have gone up, maybe production's gone down. It's very difficult to gauge these things. But let's say that we could bring in 20% of that. If we could bring in 20% of $2.6 billion, we're talking $500 million. That by far dwarfs the amount of money that's coming in from the lottery. The lottery proceeds are projected over 2 years, where this would just be a single year. Over a 2-year biennium, as our financial and physical statements are made by state government, we'd be talking about $1 billion, or maybe a tenth or more of total state revenue.
Well, Paul, I thought you were going to get into the fact that Oregon Cannabis Tax Act put all that aside, that we direct money to go into
Exactly.
treatment programs, education. That's the
what I meant
important
to go
thing. It doesn't matter what the money figures are, because people will always argue with us. But
Yeah.
but if we can point the fact that we're going to direct proceeds to treatment programs, education programs, so that the people will be able to get help if they want help.
Well, 90% of the proceeds would go into the state general fund as revenue for state programs. But then 8% would go into drug treatment programs. Right now, alcoholics and addicts are turned away 90% of the time when they seek help. And usually they only can get that help after they've been found guilty of some other crime. Well, our initiative would increase funding for that by several times. And it would, 8% of the total proceeds would go into substance abuse treatment programs. 1% would go into funding and creating a comprehensive and realistic drug education program for kids. And then the final 1% would go into a state agricultural committee to promote industrial hemp. Since hemp has been repressed, and many people, myself included, believe that the whole marijuana smokescreen, pun intended, was created to divert attention away from the fact that hemp produces more fiber, protein, and oil than any other crop. We think that 1% of the proceeds from the profit of the sale of the drug going to reestablish this vital and sustainable industry is quite appropriate. We think it'll help put Oregon on the cutting edge of exciting new developments and technologies that are truly sustainable.
Well, yeah, I believe that we can't, just as we can't throw out all sorts of wild numbers about tax proceeds coming from this, we don't know what the industrial hemp market would be, because it's been so long. We've been caught up in this cult of modernity. We said, okay, now we can have petroleum, now we can have plastics, we can have cotton, and people were so excited by new modern things, they forgot hemp, because hemp, all of a sudden became, that was for the low class. People wore hemp clothes. The upper classes wore silk and then cotton, and so it became sort of this thing like only the lower class people would wear it and would use it as a fiber, and then only lower class people would use it as a intoxicant, and that's that's what we have to get back away from.
Right. Either that or we all got a cop to being low-class people.
Yeah.
And we're not.
And we're not. You bet we're not.
But it's, we've got to learn, again, what hemp can do for us. We've forgotten. And that's what it comes down to.
If there's to be even a halfway chance of saving the remaining trees and putting the farmland into useful service, hemp is the way to do it.
Until about 140 years ago, over 90% of all the world's paper was made from hemp.
Of course, remember, 140 years ago, there was very little paper in this world.
Yeah,
so,
there was a lot less.
So we
It's
don't.
true.
So when people start throwing those numbers around, I just want to put that in perspective, that we just don't know what industrial hemp will do for us, because we haven't used it in so long. It's time to experiment.
I know my household is now we're active. We read a lot. We write a lot, and so forth. But we're jacking out the equivalent of 20 foot a tree every 2 weeks in terms of newsprint. 3 foot of newsprint's 20 foot a tree.
Yeah.
And every 2 weeks we're firing out 20 foot a tree.
Yeah.
And I'm appalled.
Every
And
paper's
we cut
correct.
down and we recycle, and I'm just appalled between the mail, the newspaper, and then the computer paper and the advertisements, the stuffers. There's that much thick clay paper in the Oregonian when it comes by. It weighs the shiny stuff weighs almost as much as the paper itself.
Yeah.
But there's a tremendous amount of trees going up the chimney that need not. There are other sources of pulp and fiber.
Now, as some numbers that I do like to refer back to are the United States Department of Agriculture studies that were done at the turn of this century. In 1916, the U.S. Department of Agriculture began looking at hemp herds, which were traditionally a waste material. Hemp was traditionally grown for the bark, or the bast fiber, that's the outer part of the stalk. And the interior part of the stalk, the hemp herds, were a waste material that was used as animal bedding or sometimes burned as a fuel. But with the introduction of the decorticating machine at the turn of this century, that waste material could be collected much more efficiently than it could previously be done when it was the bast fiber was separated by hand. In 1916, the United States Department of Agriculture did a bulletin, USDA Bulletin 404. The name of that bulletin was Hemp Herds as a Paper-Making Material. And in that, they said to provide a mill that makes 100 tons of paper a day. And by today's standard, 100 tons of paper a day is a very small mill. But by those standards, it was an average mill back at the turn of this century. To provide that mill with enough trees to feed the mill would take 40,500 acres. To provide that same mill with this waste product from producing hemp bast fiber and hemp seed, oil, and protein would take just 10,000 acres under cultivation. Now that's according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Bulletin 404. Admittedly, it's a dated document, and agricultural techniques have been improved since then. Mm-hmm. But those techniques haven't been in practice with hemp.
Well,
so we really don't know what it would do today.
To get back, it's time to experiment once again, and pun intended there once again. We have to experiment with hemp to find out what it can do for us, and we've forgotten as a society, and it's time to say, okay, let's do it, and that's why we have the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act. Asking folks out there to get out there and petition. It's the fun thing to do. You get out with friends. And it's amazing how quickly time goes by and how many signatures you can get in a hurry. If nothing else, get your family to sign this and your few friends. But the best thing to do is come out and petition. At some summer event, concerts, waterfront parks, or at malls. And there's also out there now the Oregon Drug Control Amendment put out by the American Anti-Prohibition League. And then there's a referendum on the recriminalization bill. So help us out. And what's
Now's
our phone
the time
number?
to get active.
What's our phone number?
Our phone number, which is on the screen, you should call it if you're in the Portland area, is 235-4606. If you're outside of the Portland area and you're watching this, it's 1-503-235-4606. And if you're on the internet, you can just pull our petitions and everything off the web at www.crrh.org. Get those petitions, because that's the way you can have a real impact, and it's the most highly effective activity you could take to stop the buildup of coercive police power in America. That's what I think.
Yeah, and initiatives, all of these so-called political consultants and the politicians in Salem themselves say that if you get something on a ballot, that's when they pay attention.
That's true.
It's like what happened last time with the Oregon Clean Stream Initiative. It got on the ballot, but it lost. But Governor Kitzhaber, they had to do something this year, because it was on the ballot. Just like, so this will do it. This will tell the folks in Salem that we're serious about this, taking back our freedoms.
That's absolutely right. But we can't do it ourselves. I often hear the question, what are you going to do to legalize marijuana? Well, we're not going to do it by ourselves. We're all in this together, and it's going to take all of us to stop this. And it's going to take us going to our family and friends. It's going to take us getting petitions. Thanks for watching. It's been another exciting edition of Oregon
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Dr.
Cannabis
Fred.
Tax Act and Cannabis Common Sense. Thanks for coming, Fred.
Hey, good.
Thanks for doing, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Oop.
Right.
1959, many years ago, I was a sophomore in medical school, and I was smitten by an inappropriate stroke of curiosity when I read a selection in a textbook called Goodman and Gilman about cannabis, which whetted my curiosity because it was prohibited, but medically it sounded as if it was pretty benign. This curiosity led me to read everything in the medical school library, and then eventually permitted me to infiltrate to the heart of the beast, the National Institute of Mental Health, where I was hired as a research psychiatrist to study cannabis. At this time, cannabis was seen as a real threat to society because in 1967, when I was there, all hell was breaking loose with Lyndon B. Johnson trying to keep up the pretext of patriotism as he moved forward on the war in Vietnam. And the anti-war demonstrations were just tremendous in scope. I just wish we would see these kinds of protests again. But marijuana was seen as something dangerous that was being adopted by subversive organizations like California communes. And they saw the end of civilization coming near because the legal governance was breaking down as they sent more and more young men off to be killed in Vietnam. Unfortunately, I came out to California and ended up defecting. And there I fled and did my practice of psychiatry until things started happening in California. It happened starting in the Haight-Ashbury and in the Castro in the response to the AIDS epidemic, where different kinds of effective medicines were unknown. But what was discovered was cannabis would prevent nausea and vomiting and permit the use of different kinds of medicines for treating AIDS and the chemotherapy. Well, this snowballed, and what started in the Castro was taken under the wing of the political pros, and we went statewide, and we passed Proposition 215. 2 years later, same kind of thing passed up here in Oregon. Since that time, I've had opportunities to evaluate over 11,000 patients for their use of cannabis. And what has impressed me is cannabis is both safe, effective, and a viable substitute for many medications used to manage chronic illness that's far safer and free from adverse effects. Unfortunately, the forces of evil, namely the greed of the pharmaceutical companies, coupled with the criminal justice sorehead losers, don't want to admit this to be a medicine and will do everything they can to suppress it.
The psychiatry that I used to know does not exist anymore, which is talk therapy. And it's all pill pushing. It's all medication. And to that end, we really don't know what is happening, and this extends not just to psychotropics, but I'm going to read you a short letter to John A. Kitzhaber, MD, Director, Center for Evidence-Based Policy, Oregon Health and Science University. And this is who I suggest if you want to contact to embarrass a little bit. On February 25th, I happened to view a panel presentation by your organization on C-SPAN on the cost-benefit study of different pharmaceuticals contracted by AARP. The sum total of that panel was they could not develop any cost-benefits analyses because in analyzing the pharmaceutical literature,
they discovered it was all promotional rather than objective and scientific. So everything masquerading as science is not. So based upon California clinical experience with a range of chronic conditions, our findings indicate a significant advantage over other pharmaceuticals conventionally utilized because of improved quality of life and fewer adverse effects. Consequently, we request the opportunity to discuss our findings with you. Attached is a list of conditions. And guess what the response was? So I'm glad this is going over cable TV in the Portland area, and hopefully somebody out there in the viewing audience can give the center a call and ask them to include cannabis in their studies, and especially about the mental health issue. I would be fascinated to hear the response, but I won't hold my breath.
May I interject just very briefly that obviously there's so much reduction in pharmaceutical use that it's an enormous opening for research, which unfortunately physicians who are taking care of patients in a primary care setting, they don't seem to be monitoring the change in prescription drug patterns of their patients before and after they become members of the OMMP. And it's remarkable because these patients are they're basically reducing opiates tremendously, and actually there's research I'm sure you guys are all aware of about the synergistic effects of the receptor effects of opiates and cannabinoids, where they basically are hitchhiking with each other, and much smaller doses of both medications create the same benefit with, of course, much less side effects. These are really remarkable findings, and I really regret that there aren't physicians who are just monitoring the reduction in the prescription patterns of their patients. If they doubt that cannabis is useful, I would encourage them to please do so, and just, a before and after evaluation of their prescriptions will show how much reduction or how much change there is. But it's really a lost opportunity. There's a lot of possibilities.
You know what you just said, you think that's new? If you read marijuana medical papers, in the Ohio State Medical Society meeting on cannabis in 1860, a Dr. Frommuller from Ohio reported that using an alternating courses of opiates and cannabis for treating chronic conditions reduced dependence on opiates. 1859 this was written. And so, this is something new. No, we're talking about the takeover by Big Farm and ruining policy through their special interest money. And furthermore, the fact that this whole system, can I use my favorite phrase?
Oh, why not?
Monomolecular mercantile madness. This is all patent office driven. If you look back to what it was before the single molecule ascended to its role in current commercial medicine, you'll see that it's all secondary to what can get patented. And they claim that the newly patented material is increasingly better, blah, 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 but then you see what's happened to the literature. It's gotten thoroughly corrupted and perverted so that you don't know what's happening, and here we have now a drug-seeking, drug-hungering public convinced that they need all sorts of combinations of patentable materials. And it's really sickening our society. And when they started directly advertising to the public, for psychotropics especially, ask your doctor. Social anxiety disorder, all these kinds of influences to influence you and their bottom line.
Any other questions?
Okay, that was Dr. Todd Mikuriya, who wrote medical marijuana papers back in the early 80s. And directly to his left, that was an RN by the name of Ed Glick. To his right was Dr. Rick Baer, the chief petitioner on Oregon's ballot measure 67, the medical marijuana law that passed in 1998. Then the other fellow off to the side there that wasn't talking much in that clip was Dr. Cohen from Oregon, another physician who helps medical marijuana patients. How are you doing, Don?
I'm great, Paul.
It's good to see you. Don Dupay here is currently a social worker, but he's also a retired Portland police detective with, what is it, a 17?
I think it's reasonable to talk about the malady that most of our patients are complaining of in the clinic, and that is back pain. Now, there are a lot of reasons for back pain, but by far the most frequent reason for discomfort is degenerative disc disease. Now, you all know that at one time, at least most of us believe, that at one time we were swinging in the trees and we ultimately came down and stood up on our hind legs, and this was one of the problems that encountered the problem with disc problems. If you stand in a vertical position, you have vertebral bodies that have shock absorbers between them, which are called discs. And I'll show you a little bit of a diagram here. These are vertebral bodies, and in between the vertebral bodies, as shock absorbers, we have discs. And this is just gives you an idea of what our problems are. Now, the discs are, as we said, shock absorbers. They are very thick and fibrous around the periphery and very tough. But as time goes on, as we age, we start to have degenerative problems in the disc. This is a disc looking down on it. The outside is fibrous tissue. The inside, strangely enough, is gelatinous. So it's like Jell-O. Now, what happens to these discs as they degenerate is, in some cases, they get a weak spot and they bulge. When they bulge, they have a tendency to cause pressure on nerves that originate from this area, and it can cause pain. The other problem is when one of these ruptures, it actually breaks open, and this gelatinous material is forced out and sits outside in this area, and once again causes pressure on these nerve roots. So this is the thing that we see with most frequency, and there are many ways of treating this. Because I am surgically oriented, I am most happy with a surgical approach, but it's not always possible. So today we can treat them surgically. We can treat them with some injections of lidocaine or material that will decrease pain. But we end up most of the time using our proverbial cannabis. And cannabis helps these people incredibly with handling their discomfort. And once again, this is the thing that we see with most frequency in our clinics.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rose.
Disease. And tonight we're going to talk about a strange disease called GERD. It's a gastroesophageal reflux disease. There are a number of people that have this problem. And it's very distressing because when you swallow your food, normally you feel no untoward effects. But in people who have GERD, they have severe indigestion. Now, indigestion is one thing, but severe indigestion secondary to GERD has some ominous implications. And bear with me for just a minute. I'm going to draw you a quick picture of the stomach. Now, when you swallow food comes down the esophagus, and it goes through a little valve that is positioned right here. And that valve allows the food to go into the stomach, but it doesn't allow any of the gastric acid that's in the stomach that is responsible for breaking down the material that you've swallowed. In other words, food comes down, but it doesn't go up. In people who have gastroesophageal reflux disease, they have a valve that is non-functional. As soon as food hits the stomach agitates the food, and cells along the lining of the stomach are called parietal cells, and they secrete acid that helps break down food products. Well, what's above the little valve here? It's our esophagus. It's the same tissue as your skin. So if acid from the stomach goes up into the esophagus, it burns the esophagus, just like it would be if you poured acid on your skin. Well, that is the flaw in gastroesophageal reflux disease. There are surgical procedures that are helpful in controlling this, but many times the symptoms themselves can be ameliorated with the judicious use of cannabis. So if this area here is not functional and acid gets flushed up into your esophagus, you experience the burning. If we can control that, the patient feels a lot better. And last but not least, the cells that are lining the esophagus right here are skin cells. Over a long period of time, acid being flushed up into those skin cell areas and burned can cause a bad problem called cancer of the esophagus. It's the so-called Barrett's disease of the esophagus. So if we can discourage the ongoing flush of acid into that area and discourage the pain, we have helped the patient.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Think about hemp. Hemp. Industrial hemp. See, I think that the medical marijuana movement will get a lot further if they will reach out and help explain the realities of hemp, the larger issue of hemp. Hemp, medical marijuana. Hemp helps everybody. Hemp helps the earth. Hemp is earth medicine. And I don't see enough awareness being given to hemp as hemp. We're too busy using the medical marijuana for our own enjoyment and to help heal the pain and these different things. But we're ignoring hemp. Hemp will help the planet. Practical reality, if we're going to talk about medicine, all right, we're talking about medical marijuana as medicine for the people. But hemp is medicine for the earth. And if we forget the earth, then we're only going halfway there. Anyway, that's just some attitude, all right? Hemp. Hemp. Industrial hemp. You can build your home out of it. You can make your clothes out of it. And hemp, the CBDs in hemp, all right, are a larger they serve a larger medicinal purpose for the human body than even the THC does. And people need to kind of look at this. Because we're talking about diabetes, we're talking about epilepsy, we're talking about cancer. It's very effective against breast cancer. All right, we're talking about a real deal here, but nobody's paying any attention to it. All the attention is being put to the THC aspect, and I think it's time to recognize the entire plant. For the earth, for us.